All right, here we go, guys. In the Bushes episode.
Hold up. I want to
Gotta
show
make sure
you
you're right, 'cause we got it wrong last time.
Got it wrong last 2 times. I think it's 16. I want to say 16.
All right, episode 16. We got a really special one today. The 8-cylinder special done by Brandon Young here. I'm going to let him kind of run with this one. I'm going to facilitate some questions throughout, but this is his show, and here we go. So, kind of quick background on this, Brandon. You know, you started the 8 cylinders. What year was that?
2010.
2010. And these are kind of some absolutes you found within biomechanics that every pitcher should have. Obviously, if you have all of them, that's great, but at least some of them.
Correct.
So I want to give you the time to talk about the backstory, how you came up with these absolutes, and why they're so important.
Yeah, it'll be a lot, but everyone enjoy. So mechanics, of course, it's a dense frontier, right? And we're still exploring it.
Always.
Things that seemed to be exact a year ago or have changed and been modified now as we continue to learn. And as the equipment is advanced, so is the 8 cylinders.
Right.
So I wanted the whole 8 cylinders is built off of medical and scientific knowledge and is medically and scientifically proven. So it's built off of research, it's built off of what we've seen here, it's built off of Class 5 data, clinical research, things that I've seen in the clinic with injuries applied to it. So it's been built off of all that information. PT school, every aspect of it, neuroanatomy, pediatrics, motor learning, motor control, all of it.
Right.
Physics, so all piled in there. And the reason I came up with 8 cylinders is, you see the logo, maybe the logo will be popped up. That's a baseball with 8 exhaust pipes. Those are not wings. I've heard that a couple of times.
Sure,
like,
yeah.
why did you put wings on a baseball? The idea is an engine inside the ball.
Right.
And each cylinder represents a movement. Just like in an engine, the cylinders work together to make the engine go.
Yep.
If cylinder 1 fires, there's energy from that. Then at the exact correct time, cylinder 2, so on and so forth. And now you have 8 cylinders working together to turn the rocker arm on a vehicle. It makes this 2-ton machine go 150 miles per hour. Well, we're really no different.
Right.
When everything works in sequence, that energy's passed up the chain and finally to the ball. And I think that's probably the most important aspect of velocity is the final summation of how much energy you pass to the ball equates to the velocity. So if it takes 1,000 Newton meters of force to throw 100, that's what you have to pass in order to throw 100. Anything less, it's not 100.
Yeah.
And understanding that as you're throwing the ball, there's actually a collision between your fingers and the ball. People don't look at it that way because the ball's in your hand till you release it, but there's a lot of compression.
Yeah.
As that energy gets to its sum, and at the end, boom, if it's 1,000 Newton meters, again, you're throwing 100 miles per hour. So understanding that's the end result is kinetic energy is very helpful. And that's, I always ask kids that sit in on 8 cylinders what they think creates velocity. I get a slew of answers. Rarely it's energy, but that is the answer. So to understand kinetic energy, you must first understand potential energy. Potential energy is energy stored. An example would be stretching a rubber band. The more I stretch a rubber band, the more energy I load. When I release it, it becomes kinetic.
Sure.
Well, we're elastic by nature, so the human body really can create it 2 different ways. One is our myofascial system, our muscles, they stretch. Bigger muscles are going to create more energy. When that muscle contracts, that energy goes from a potential state to kinetic, travels through you to whatever object you're in contact with. And the more the merrier. So if you apply that further, little rotator cuff muscles are not going to produce as much energy as the glutes and the quads and some of the rotators of the spine.
Right.
So those are the ones that you really want to heavily recruit to get the energy you need to throw hard. And that's a really important concept.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings a good point. Like, kind of, obviously we use a 3D motion capture, but just kind of the importance of the force plate.
Oh, huge.
As well, I mean, you kind of were transitioning into that, I feel like. But
yeah,
what do you see in that side of things?
So that's a big point. So if you're getting a 3D done, state of the art, the gold standard is the markered system. It's the most accurate, right? But if you're just doing a 3D, all you're getting is kinematics. The kinetics are assumed.
Sure.
So if you're not doing a 3D with force plates, you're missing the big picture. You're getting a small part. And I'm not saying it's not good. It's certainly better than high-speed video. It's certainly better than the eyeballs.
Right.
But it is not the big picture. And you're missing a huge chunk of what's really going on.
Right.
Because remember, we're after that energy at the end. And if we're not using force plates, we're not getting it. And force plates, let me go a little further, are not created equal. All right? Mm-hmm. Some are not going to give you the 3 planes. Some are not going to consider shear force. And some are not anchored in. So if the force plates are not anchored, you're also not getting the big picture. So all those things have to be in place for you to get the correct picture, which was what we have here. And it took me years to acquire it. It's very expensive, obviously. Technology's worth its cost. It tells us exactly what we need to do.
Right, yeah.
So, which gets into the next part of how we create energy is Sir Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right?
Sure.
So the harder we push on the ground, the harder the ground pushes back. If the segments are trailing enough, that energy has time to get to the ball. So if the segments aren't, then the cylinders are not timed up right.
Sure.
Just like in an engine, you're not going to get the production you need.
Yeah.
And we do see a lot of timing issues, and that's how we're able to really pinpoint that it is a timing issue, is using those force plates and timing it up. And Joey does a great job with looking at that, seeing where the peak forces, the vertical, the horizontal are, and then saying this person's missing their body weight in force. That is priceless information to know.
100%, yeah.
So, and it all plays a role.
No doubt.
So those are the 2 ways, right? Aeroelasticity to produce that potential, contract, then it goes kinetic, and then Sir Newton's third law, as we push on those force plates, that they push back. And that's your summation of energy, and the more you have, the harder you're going to throw.
Was there one person that kind of made you feel like we had to get all this technology? Was there one instance that was like, I need to do this?
There's a lot. I think the last person was Jackson Goddard. We did not see his front knee extend. It basically was isometric. But he's capable of upper 90s type velocity. So even though we don't see the kinematics of that front knee bracing like we do in some, we knew he's still producing a lot of energy. It's just isometric. And then to study how someone that doesn't straighten the front knee can produce that kind of energy, well, you needed force plates to do it.
Right.
And his evaluation was done over Apex before we had the force plates, but it was confirmation that this piece of technology was a must to get the complete picture.
Gotcha.
And we've learned a lot since then about guys that maybe you don't visually see the front knee brace up, but they produce more energy than those that do. Mm-hmm. And so the learning continues.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in cylinder 4, but
right.
It is cool because you hear all this stuff that you have to do this, that, and the other, but then we get the tech and the data, and then it's, well, maybe you don't have to. Maybe aesthetically it's a little bit different than a Verlander or whoever has like this huge front knee, right? So it's really cool to see. Let's kind of go into the cylinders. Let's talk cylinder 1 here. How did you come to this conclusion that this was the first cylinder and where we needed to start?
I will jump back to that. I have one more point on the engine.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
And then we'll circle back to cylinder 1. So the engine concept, right? Mm-hmm. It was more than just the concept of timing and passing energy from one to the other. Everyone's kind of got the kinetic sequence now. But what kind of engine do you have? The cylinders in an engine, the size of them, how many liters they can hold designates their name. So you have 6.2 liter Hemi, 5.7 liter, blah, 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 5.0. the more liters it can hold, the more capable of higher horsepower. Well, in the human body, we're genetically made up by X amount of fast twitch muscle fibers and X amount of slow twitch.
Sure.
And it's debatable, but I think still heavily, you only have so many fast twitch muscle fibers, and there's no cross-link, there's no crossover. Mm-hmm. You can't make a slow twitch into a fast twitch. At least that was what I learned in school, and I think it still stands from a genetic standpoint. However, you can train the fast twitch muscle fibers that you have.
Gotcha, okay.
Right? So when we talk about training pitchers, that's what you want to recruit. It's dropping the 60 time, it's increasing the vertical, it's really pushing the anaerobic capacity, anaerobic power, anaerobic threshold that's going to get that fastball up.
Yeah.
Because if you're not recruiting those muscle fibers, then you're not going to produce this quick energy that you need to get up the chain to the ball. Those are the huge power producers, is the type 2B fast oxidative glycolytic. I didn't make it up. Google it. But that's what, if you want to throw hard, that's what you need. And it does mean, from a genetic standpoint, that your ceiling is going to be limited by that genetically.
Yeah.
But you can train the fast twitch muscle fibers, and it's not just in a squat rack, right?
Right, 100%.
It's phasing that stuff. I'm not saying don't lift weights, but just improving your squat max is not going to improve your fastball.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things that need to be done. We are perfecting that craft as well with our performance team.
Sure.
Taking, what we find on the 3D motion capture, the force plates. Joey confirmed you cannot trick those force plates. Mm-hmm. It's going to say this guy's explosive and fast twitch or not, and then we know exactly what kind of exercise prescription to prescribe to that individual.
Right.
So that's a big part of the picture, and I use this example as well. So if you think of your muscles as a CPU, it's had, we build a CPU the size of this room, and it's got the fastest processors in the world. Mm-hmm. And your nervous system is the internet connection, but you're on dial-up. You can't take advantage of all that processing speed. Right. So oftentimes the nervous system is not thought about or talked about, but you have this huge processing system, like big muscles, but your nerve signal is slow.
Yeah.
You can't take advantage of what you've built. So you've got to consider the nervous system, and we have exercise physiologists, we have doctors of physical therapy, we're studying this stuff. We know how to train both.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the first time I saw somebody doing the toe tap test, I was like, what in the heck is that? You know what I mean? It's something just so different, but when it's explained in that sense where, our bodies only has to have that speed, that processing system, right? And if we lose that, you're not going to be able to perform at the highest level. So I think training that mind-body connection, and speeding up those processings of the nervous system is super important. So
sure, it's
very different, but I think it's something that is lost within just overall training.
Sure, I agree, and that provides a good transition to mechanics, like mm-hmm. understanding some of the foundation of how we throw hard is step one, and then understand the mechanics that provide that energy up the chain is the rest of the way. So to go back to what you ask, cylinder one is going to be the back leg, right? Mm-hmm. And this has been an evolution in my career, as well as I think probably many others that really study pitching under a microscope. And it debunks a lot of what we're told and still told today, which is drive down the mound. Push your back leg. You want to use your back leg. You want to drive down the mound. And I can't argue with linear speed down the mound. Like, it's good, but how you do it is the key.
Sure.
So ever since I started, I did all my pitching sessions with a radar gun. And I noticed 99% of the time, the more I had people drive off the back leg, the slower they threw. And it was frustrating because that goes against physics, right? Mm-hmm. So if you take a 200-pound human and you move them quicker, how does that not equate to more energy at the end? Force equals mass times acceleration, right? So how does that not equate to more kinetic energy into the ball at the end? Well, it's a lot more complicated than just that. But, you know, it was an eye-opening pitching session. I had this kid from Broughton, who's about 135 pounds, 0 back leg drive, just rotation. Mm-hmm. Throwing 90 miles an hour. Like I said, he was 135 pounds soaking wet. Just really watched what his back leg did, and then went up the chain, and we've built a lot off of what he was able to do. You know, understanding the concept of how energy is lost and transferred. I oftentimes, when it comes to the stride, I tell guys, like, imagine that you're a scoreboard and you have your choice of getting hit by one of 2 home runs, right?
Okay.
The first home run is 115 miles per hour off the bat. That's the exit velocity, right? It's a big lollipop shot, goes up, comes down and hits you. The next is 115 miles per hour off the bat. Same exit speed, same kinetic energies, a line drive hits you. Which one do you want to get hit by, right? And they all go with the pop fly. So when you take that concept into a stride and you push and the front leg lifts or hovers, that's your lollipop home run. So all that energy you use off the back leg to get down the mound is used to fight Earth's gravity in the ball's case, right? The exit velocity. So the baseball is going to climb until it has no more kinetic energy. It's going to apex at that point.
Sure.
And then it's going to return, and it's not going to leave as much of a dent. So lollipop strides are really pushy, getting the front foot out, it's hovering.
Yeah.
There's a decel, and by the time the foot lands, how much do you have left? How much do you have to bring back up the chain at that point?
Yeah.
And that's the most important event, right? Foot plant. So that's where you're going to drive into the ground and produce a lot of energy. As long as the body is trailing, that energy will make it to the ball and life is good. If not, it's not.
Right.
And the other thing is the lollipop takes a lot longer, right? And a lot of times, especially the younger the pitcher, they can't hold back. So they're starting to throw the ball before the foot is down.
Yeah.
So now you have that segment is unable to receive the energy. So it becomes a mess. And that's why drop and drive or drive off the back leg can be so bad. Of course, Chris has done several segments on hip extension and how that impedes pelvic rotation. We see that a lot. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the foundation of the back leg and the work that we've done.
For sure. And for me, I think one of the coolest things that you taught me is the timing aspect of it. And you kind of alluded to it there. But, you know, when we have our front foot hover or if our heel's the first thing to hit the ground, right, our body is on a time. It's on a clock.
It is.
So when our foot is getting down, our trunk is starting to rotate. We're already going, right? And so we're losing counter rotation as that foot's taking longer to get down. And that's where you see guys that can't segment well, you know, the hip-shoulder separation suffers because of that. Mm-hmm. And I think just from after learning that, seeing it happen so many times over and over and over again, it's one of those really cool things that I think, you know, we can implement in our training and just learning how to fire that body clock at the right time. So
sure.
I think that's really cool.
Conservation of energy, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're leaking your rubber band effect in the upper torso out, and that rubber band stretched like that, but by the time the foot lands, it's like this, what do you have left?
Not as much as you should.
And back leg can destroy that if it's not trained properly.
Correct.
And there's, you know, so many examples of that. If you guys get evaluated, I will show you some really cool examples of guys like Carlos Rodon that mastered that, and Lance Honeycutt, who had already mastered it 19 years ago. When I first saw him, I just didn't know it. He was a 165-pound young man throwing 96 back then. I had the key to the test. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And now I'll go back and it's like, wow, there was the key, you know, or a big part of it. Right. So
that's the beauty of learning, though. You know.
Yes, it's been a fun journey.
Yeah. So obviously going in the back leg, and we'll go into cylinder 2 here. probably the biggest buzzword, hip-shoulder separation, or buzz term, I should say. I think everybody knows what it is to some extent, but training it is one thing, right? And it's a completely different beast, and trying to understand how to disassociate the trunk from the lower half and the pelvis. What did you find? And again, was there an instance where it's like, okay, this makes a lot of sense from the cylinder standpoint?
Well, that you use the absolute correct terminology, disassociation. That's the ability of one segment to move and not another. So, the ability to rotate the pelvis while keeping the upper torso quiet is key, right? And then putting together all the small things that have to happen in the lower extremity to get the pelvis where it needs to be and rotating appropriately while keeping the torso back. And what makes that cylinder work is your pelvis is facing home and your upper torso is facing third. If you're a right-hander, you're stretching the obliques, rectus abdominis, these muscles called the multifidi that rotate the spine. These are little muscles that go, you're putting every one of those on stretch. That's going to be a huge power producer, energy producer that you need.
Right.
Not even considering the timing aspect of having the torso back. That's what allows it to receive the energy and transfer it cleanly to the ball. If you don't have that, you won't.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
I think so, yeah. And I guess what I should say is, for us, learning how to train that, and we see so many high school kids in here that just don't have that ability to do that. Is that, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, is that something where the mind-body, the neural connection just isn't there, or is it an overall athleticism thing? What in the history of us doing this, what has kind of been the main reason that guys can't disassociate?
Oh, there's a good point. I think it could go back to motor learning when you're an infant. Did you reciprocally crawl? I mean, this is big in peds, right? And development.
Yeah.
And we study this in PT school. There's something called army crawling. Those kids don't learn how to have those rotations and this dissociation that you need to be functional. And then as you get older, did you just play baseball?
Yeah.
Did you play basketball, football? Can you turn and catch to the right like you could to the left?
Just body control.
Body control and having the neural awareness to move the pelvis and not the upper torso. They can do it well. I know, Latin Americans, Dominicans have a reputation for throwing very hard.
Yep.
And they dance a lot, right? They're in their culture, and they move, and dancing would be a good example of being able to move one segment and not another.
That's just awareness, right?
Awareness and being able to control and move the body.
Yeah.
I think all those play a role.
Yeah.
Now, can it be taught? Yes, we teach it, obviously. We know it can be.
Sure.
But how much better is it if you reciprocally crawl as an infant, right? And you follow that motor control and motor planning through adolescence, etc. I think it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, I think it'd be something fun to test out, as maybe make kids crawl here and figure out
who can and
who can't. There's so many different ways of training and learning how to, and everyone's gonna be so different on how they learn. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this field of what we do is trying to get the best out of every individual. There is not one cookie cutter way of teaching and training, but there are some absolutes like we're talking about now. But now let's move on to cylinder 3. This is one that is interesting in the fact that not everybody uses it, but when they do use it, it can impact either positively or negatively.
Sure.
And that's hip, shoulder, and the sagittal plane, correct?
Correct.
So go ahead and explain that.
So cylinder 2 is hip shoulder separation dissociation, and the transverse plane, like you just said, and cylinder 3 is hip shoulder separation in the sagittal plane. So it's thoracolumbar extension.
Sure.
It's been called stack and track. It's been coined a couple of different things, but it's basically having that, if you look at someone from the side, you could draw a backwards C on a right-hander if you're looking at him from a third base view. And you get a lot of stretching of the abs, anterior core muscles with that. And as the torso comes forward, now we're talking angular, not linear, and the arm is whipping with it, that can be a powerful asset.
Yeah.
Not everyone does it. You have guys that are very rotational in the transverse plane and they don't use cylinder 3, that's perfectly fine. You have guys that combine transverse and sagittal, they throw hard. So it's understanding how they're producing velocity, and on the training side, knowing what you can and cannot do, which that's been 20 years of work, right?
For sure.
And dicing out, are you more linear, which is not good? Are you more angular, which is good? The only way you're going to do that is with the 3D system and the force plates combined. It's the only way you're going to do that, is to dice those two out.
Yeah, when you say, linear, you're referring to excessive, basically, dumping of the spine.
Correct.
That way.
Compensating, trying to create energy late in the throw with the spine.
Yeah.
And not in an angular sense, in a linear sense. So if I say my torso moved from point A to B, that's linear, right? The angular side is basically doing a crunch.
Correct. Gotcha. No, it makes sense, and it's something, again, that's very interesting. How many high school kids do you think we see on a daily basis, weekly basis, that actually use that?
Cylinder 3?
Yeah.
15%.
15%.
15, 20.
Yeah. And then kind of going back to the training aspect of it, is that something that you think is crucial in the training, or it just really depends on the athlete?
It really depends on the athlete.
Yeah.
And I'd say less than 5% use it dominantly, meaning they're mainly sagittal plane pitchers.
Yeah.
They throw hard, and they're very unique, but they're rare.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay. Cylinder 4 now. I don't want to say this is probably the most, argued or whatever, but definitely the one that's been probably studied the most, I would imagine. And that's just front leg. How much force we're putting in, and that's what's the beauty of the force plates, right? Before it was just basically looking at the knee and seeing how much it retracts, but now we're able to measure it with kinematic, kind of referred to with Jackson Goddard earlier. Talk about cylinder 4, how you came up with it, and the importance of it.
So cylinder 4 is huge, and it does define what the front leg provides, and there's several. It's probably one of my favorite cylinders, if not my favorite. Massive velocity producer. So to understand it, you have to kind of think of the lower half
as a whole,
as a motorcycle.
Okay.
And the upper half is the driver.
Okay.
Right. And so you have this motorcycle going 150 miles per hour, hits a parked car. What happens to the driver? He shoots forward at 150. Motorcycle stops. Well, you have this pitcher moving, let's say 10 miles per hour down the mound. Front foot lands, that's the impact. That's a motorcycle in the car. The harder you stop, the more that upper torso is thrown forward. So that's called transfer of momentum in physics. And that transfer is big. It's not free energy. The front leg provides it, but that's an area where I'll say there's free energy there, because your front leg is going to provide that transfer of momentum. The upper half continues to go forward, the lower half stops,
right,
and energy production is big there.
Yeah.
The other thing you have, is you have Sir Newton's third law. You're pushing on the ground's equally pushing back. The harder you hit the brakes, which we get on the force plates, horizontal, right, and the vertical. How horizontal that force is can also have an impact. But that energy is going to come up the chain, and then you have the triple extension of the plant leg. So you have plantar flexion of the ankle, knee extension at the knee, and hip extension. So you have calf, quad, glute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heavy production of energy there.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And then talk about kind of the role of the pelvis being stable, and that kind of blends into cylinder 5, and we'll get to that. But the importance of the pelvis being fully rotated in order to put all that energy into the ground, or from the ground up into the ball.
Sure. So the pelvis gets to a stable position, and you still have some hip-shoulder dissociation. You're then allowed to work off a very stable base, and the energy production goes up. Imagine your core being unstable. Anything you do is sloppy, right? But when you stabilize the core, you can get really whippy.
Yep.
So example would be this would be an unstable pelvis, and my middle finger is going to be my arm. So it's not stable. If I pull it back, but if I stabilize it, now I can start producing some whippiness. I can take advantage of that elasticity and.
Yeah, that's what I see with a lot of guys too that don't get their pelvis all the way through at foot point is they still have room to go, and then we watch that knee kind of move lateral and the pelvis isn't stable and the front leg's not able to put all that energy, from the ground in the ball because there's continuous movement throughout the throw. There's not that stability factor.
Right.
And that kind of bleeds into cylinder 5 here.
Very much so.
We're talking stability of the lower half. Trendelenburg is kind of a key word that you like to use, and I've learned the meaning of it. And sneaky, we see that a good bit. Even some professional guys exhibit some instability of that lead hip. So kind of talk about how you came to that conclusion, the role of how cylinder 4 and cylinder 5 kind of, I don't want to say blend, but they kind of work off of each other in a way.
Yeah, so cylinder 5 was a fun one, and it is the only cylinder that is not backed by research. I have never seen anyone else define what the trail leg should do while the pitcher's accelerating. Right? So this is definitely very unique to BYoung. Cylinder 5, to understand it, you have to kind of understand how a helicopter works, right?
Okay.
Let me back up a little bit. Tyson Messer is going to be kind of the example. What's up, Tyson, if you're watching?
Here.
I was talking to him through the screen. So Tyson hit 90 miles an hour as a freshman at Harnett Central, and state verbaled, right? They scooped him up. Sophomore year, he couldn't get over 83. I think it was like a mystery. State dropped him, and it was pretty traumatic for him. So they came to me, and when I watched him pitch, I noticed that his back right leg, while he was rotating the upper torso, moved clockwise.
Like kicked out.
Yeah, for every frame he moved his upper torso, his trail leg scooted clockwise to the left. And I'm like, that's not just by chance. The bowler's move is you bowl, that right leg shoots off. So I really put that under the microscope and said, well, okay, as the upper torso is rotating, his leg is shooting off to the left. So we have counterclockwise motion of the upper torso, 60% of your body weight, right, moving at 1,200 degrees per second. If the lower half's not stable enough, it's going to leak out, right? And the torque that you want to make it to the ball will be lost. So the example to help people understand is is understanding how a helicopter works, right? So the propeller spins fast enough to lift this heavy object, right? Displace enough air. You have the tail and the rudder. The rudder in the back is there to stabilize the helicopter from the torque between the turbine and the propeller. If it fails, the helicopter will spin opposite, and you lose the torque you need to fly. Well, it's no different in pitchers. Imagine going into the deep end of a pool and having to tread water and trying to throw a baseball. Can you throw as hard as you could on ground? No, because you've lost that lower extremity stability. So I don't think that is evaluated at all throughout organizations. I have never seen it posted. Yeah. So I'm saying it now. This is us. It's called the Brandon Young helicopter phenomenon, cylinder 5. And, just looking at how the lower extremity moves during the meat of the acceleration tells us an awful lot. Fixing that stability is another thing, and which we did fix Tyson. And he got in the 90s and went to Campbell. He shoved against state every opportunity he got. He got drafted, I think in the 8th or 9th round by the White Sox. So he made that work. And learning how to stabilize is quite complicated.
Very,
But
I would imagine.
we have the antidote.
Yes, absolutely. And it is really interesting. You don't see a lot of big leaguers. You know, you don't see their back leg kick out like that or anything.
They're pretty stable.
Pretty stable individuals and know their body pretty well. And we can show a clip of Tyson and his journey too. So, so really cool stuff there. Now let's move kind of more to the upper half. You know, cylinder 6.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to me, this is one of my favorites. Just kind of learning how to teach this and going into the research and figuring out ways of why kids can or can't do this. And I kind of take, you know, from the youth side of things. You know, we're talking youth kids here, just from my end. A lot of the kids are taught throw strikes, you know, and they get that darty, pushy throw. They never really get that arm to go all the way back and to get into that really good scap retraction, that scap load. Mm-hmm. And the arm doesn't trail the body very well.
Right.
So cylinder 6 being shorter horizontal abduction. Where did you see this? How was this kind of brought into it, and the importance of it?
Well, if you think about a whip and how it has to unravel appropriately, you know, the whip is the arm, and it's pretty much a transfer of the energy from the ground in your body to the ball. If it is leading the body, you have no shot.
Right.
You know, it breaks up this timing mechanism that you need. It breaks up the chain. And so in order for that energy to have a shot at the ball, the more the arm trails, the better.
Yep.
So in understanding that horizontal abduction and scap load are two different things, also important. Scap load would be scapular retraction. That's part of it, right? Horizontal abduction is the humerus moving back.
Correct.
And the more it trails, the merrier. You know, I think Driveline did a lot of early work on this, and I couldn't agree with them more that the more the merrier. Mm-hmm. So we've seen that same thing in the lab. Arm that trails is a big key.
Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is almost like the compensator of all compensators. You know, I mean, if you can have an arm that trails the body long, even if you don't have the best lower half or the best, you know, I don't know, if the trunk leaks a little early, if you have that arm holding back, that's given to energy time to work up, even if it isn't, you know, kinematically the best.
Correct.
So speak to that a little bit.
It can allow, an arm that trails a lot can allow you to make mistakes.
Yeah.
In other cylinders and get away with it, and still cleanly get what you produce to the ball.
Yep.
So
it's cool stuff. I obviously we want to master as much as we can, but if we have an elite arm, you know, that kind of, like you said, it gives you a chance, because if it leads the body, you have no shot.
Right.
So I think that's pretty cool. And going into, again, the arm, the next part of it is that lay back, that external rotation of the shoulder. Everyone knows what layback is, I would imagine, that's listening to this. What is the importance of it? And when we see red flags, what are kind of the first things that we do, and we make sure that we clean those up?
So, yes, it's shoulder external rotation, layback. Mm-hmm. Anything 165 degrees or less is a red flag, right? So if you're lacking some external rotation, it is a health risk.
Yeah.
Right. If you're above that threshold, but you're not maximizing, you're still going to miss out on allowing the energy time to get to the ball.
Sure.
Which, you know, Joey can attest to that as one of his timing parameters with force plates. Is like, where's that max layback?
Yep. What's
the peak forces, and is this force late or is it early? And you know, the only way that can be tested is a full 3D with force plates. So if you have any questions, we can absolutely check anyone and say, yeah, you're losing this much. And
yeah.
But I mean, it's very impactful. I know that Sean Armstrong, you know, got DFA'd by the Orioles, came and did a 3D, and we had a couple findings, but one of his was the lack of external rotation, right? And I got him to work on some stuff that really improved the external rotation, and the next couple years, right, even now, he's thrown as hard as he ever has.
Yeah.
You know, it was big for his development, And for guys that we see that don't have that layback, it's big for them as well.
For sure. No, I think that's one of the coolest things is you can work on that from a mobility standpoint, and kind of
can be improved.
Right, and all these things that we're talking about can be improved and to some extent. And I think whether that's some sort of mobility restriction that we might see, or if it's some sort of drill we need to include, or some sort of cueing system. There's ways to get better at these type of things, especially there. I mean, I think just from, on the medical side,
Sure.
understanding shoulder external rotation and how to improve that is huge from an athlete's perspective, where, not a lot of just trainers or whatever you want to call them understand how to benefit or how to get the shoulder in a much better and healthier position.
We can do it. For years, there was some controversial verbiage going around. It wasn't research that said, "Hey, you don't want to stretch the anterior capsule of the shoulder." You want to keep the elasticity of it. And a lot of people kind of felt that way. And if you lacked external rotation, there's nothing that could be done. And throughout my career, I realized, the capsular mobility is essential in the shoulder. And yes, you can stretch the anterior capsule. And yes, the results are good. And we've devised our own methods of how to do that.
Yep.
Manual techniques with our physical therapist, as well as at-home self-management. And it works. I mean, I think we bumped Sean by 15 degrees. It makes all the difference in the world.
It does.
Now that energy has time to get to the ball, and if you're creating 950 Newton meters, but only 900 are making it to the ball, you're throwing 90. But once you get that extra 50 that you're already producing to the ball, because now you have the mobility and the time for the energy to get to the ball, now you're throwing 95, and nothing's changed.
Right.
You're just allowing the energy a pathway.
Yep. And that's the beauty of combining the medical side of things with the training side of things.
No question.
So, going into the last and final, one that, me and you have actually gone back and forth on it a lot, just from a pitch design standpoint and from a kinematic standpoint, right? Posture at ball release.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is something that I've learned to teach in the way of thinking about your spine as being that's going to dictate your arm angle. So like if our spine is neutral, we're here. It doesn't mean your side arm. It just means we're at a very neutral spine position.
Vertical spine, yeah.
Correct. So when we start to tilt, right, and we have those over the top guys, there are some leaks that we can find.
Sure.
But there are guys that do it at a high clip. So just speak to how you found posture at ball release being so important. And I'm sure, especially back in the 2010s and things, people were probably giving you a lot of crap for throwing sidearm.
Oh,
In
yeah.
reality, we're just at a really good spot where we're able to put force in the ground.
Yeah, when you realize there's really no such thing as sidearm, it's just where the spine is. Mm-hmm. It's enlightening, right?
Yep.
That the angle of the spine dictates the slot,
Yep.
not the shoulder. So, years guys are told, get your shoulder up, get your shoulder up. Well, no one throws up here. At 1,000 evaluations, everyone's 85 to 95 degrees. Mm-hmm. Submarine's just an ipsilateral tilt. Over the top is the contralateral tilt. How far you go dictates how on top of the ball you get.
Correct.
And if you get that curvature in the T-spine, right, you side bend, how well are you going to rotate? It's going to limit it. If you're vertical, the spine is going to be able to, counter rotate better and then rotate through, right, replace the shoulders. So having a vertical spine is big, right? And your muscles work best in the mid-range. So if I'm vertical, my obliques, my abs, my multifida, all those muscles are in their mid-range, they can work better. If I'm tilted, now I've shortened these obliques on the left, lengthened those on the right, they're not going to work as well. Muscle doesn't work well. It's best in a lengthened or a shortened state, it works best in the mid-range. So if we keep them in the mid-range, we're going to have more success.
Sure.
Beyond that, research has been very overwhelming that the more lateral tilt you have, the more likely you're going to get injured. And it's also impedes velocity. Have you ever seen a guy submarine throw 100 or more, right? The mirror image of that would be the contralateral tilt.
Yeah, right.
So, if you're working in the middle, it's good. Now, it gets more complicated. Guys can have a tilt, but they can be good rotators.
Yep.
And guys that tilt and have that frontal plane pull, which means they're pulling down towards front, that's not good, right? And so we can decipher what kind of thrower you are with 3D, and also looking at the forces that those that stay stacked can produce versus those that are moving their center of mass and gravity to the left. What can they produce? So can you use the ground well? So it's a lot of questions. One thing that I really did appreciate about you is it was your career, right? And you were deceptive, and you're like, hey, and the vertical break and these things can't go. Like, these are the things that got me here, and I respect that, right? To stay in my lane. So a lot of times when we get to cylinder 8, I defer to the pitch design team. Like, can this guy throw some filthy stuff from a vertical standpoint? Or is that tilt necessary? Right. Is the tilt healthy? Is it safe?
Yeah.
We can get about as close as you can get to answering those questions.
For sure, and especially with high school kids, and I think this is the hat falling off phenomenon. When you're looking at high school kids, that so many of them come in here and their hats are just flying off. And if you watch, I'm sure if you watch a lot of Twitter videos, same thing, you'll see high school hats flying. That's that pull. Right?
Yep, that's that pull.
And that's associating velocity with the pull instead of where we need to be putting force in the ground and the proper positions we need to be in. So the faster we can train our mind that velocity isn't produced in
pulling,
in that pulling feel, I guess you could say, the faster I think we see more results from a health standpoint, command standpoint especially. I mean, it's really hard to throw strikes when you're probably looking at first or third base. And kind of going off the posture thing, if you look at Paul Skeens, everyone talks about how easy he throws. His posture is literally perfect.
Perfect.
And that's a big human being able to put a lot of force in the ball from the ground based off those things. So really cool stuff, Brandon. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything you want to end with here, or any certain thing I didn't ask or you didn't hit on?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast and get this stuff out there, and so people have a little bit more awareness. It's a fantastic working model. It's got 22 years put into it, and it's still being refined and built. So it's just going to get better.
For sure. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Episode, what was that? 16, you said?
16.
16. Thanks. Appreciate it, guys.